Stephanie, welcome. Great to see you.
Thank you.
So what do you think about this Stan Marks guy, you know?
About who?
Dr. Marks.
Oh,
yeah.
brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
You're
impressed.
Impressed, okay.
Yes.
You really like him. You're not going to, nothing he missed, he got it all.
Oh,
Tell us,
tell
the audience, I mean, I know that you're the second person I've known now who I have met through these forums that we've done around the country who is living and managing cancer as opposed to beating cancer. There was and I think I've got it right, there was a wonderful woman I met out in Las Vegas, again in this community that really is trying to sort of change the tectonic dimensions of what they have as possible out there, and she was, in her case, it may have been secondhand or something, she's trying to challenge some of the venues out there. But tell us how you are here today and why you are here to tell your story.
Sure. When I was in my late 30s, after having my 2 kids, I started to feel this odd pain in my side when I coughed or sneezed, just when I coughed or sneezed. And it really smarted, but it was only then. So it took me a while to see anyone. And then I had a baby, and then I was nursing her, so I knew they wouldn't do an x-ray. And so it was 2 years until I went to see the doctor. She did an x-ray. Nothing. It, looked fine. A couple months later, I went back, and I said, it's still happening. More tests. Nothing. It looks fine. Continued this path, said to my doctor at one point, having this unresolvable pain does not seem right. Is there a chance there's something really bad going on here? And she said, from the best I can tell, and from the tests we've done, no, it doesn't appear so. So that took about 2.5 years. And finally, a CAT scan angiogram showed something, and then continued on the route of a surgical biopsy and those kinds of things. So from the first time I had pain, we're looking at 4.5 years, and I had stage 4 cancer, and I was 39 at the time. So it was quite a shock. I have no risk factors for the disease, no cancer in my family, none of that. So it had really, really come out of nowhere.
How are you managing it? So what is the science of you managing it?
I have been incredibly blessed. I have only been able to do drug therapies because as a stage 4 patient.
I mean, I wanted,
yes.
So I happen to know, so she still looks like in her 30s, I would say late 20s. But I know that you're 50 now, right?
Not yet.
Okay. Oops. Well.
A few months.
A few months. Well, I say that not. I mean, look, I just blew every moment of.
No.
I blew the 8. But I mean, the point is, you've been living with this for a decade, more than a decade.
Yes.
That's the big point.
Yes, and my children, when I was diagnosed, were 2 and 4.
Right.
So it was pretty disastrous having my kids that age. So but I could only be on drug therapies. They weren't going to do surgeries. They couldn't do radiation, that kind of thing, because I was stage 4. Right. So I was pretty sure I was going to die in a year or 2. And my biggest fear was my children are not going to remember me. That's it. They're going to be, barely in elementary school, and they are going to have no memory of their mother. And they're going to remember the next woman my now ex-husband picked. So that was my nightmare, is that my children wouldn't ever know me. And they are now, in a couple months, they will be 13 and 15. So it's been really amazing. But I've been on drug therapies. I have been fortunate. I'm one of those people that drugs work on me. And it does seem like there are people who have, just you don't really have that success with all these drug treatments. But I have been very lucky. So I've been on a number of medicines a few years. I've gone through a couple clinical trials. I have a mutation called ALK that is targeted by the last medication I had been on and the one I'm on now. And I do have metastases to my brain, but they are asymptomatic, and thank goodness. And the reason I went from the last drug treatment to this drug treatment were that those had begun to grow and spread. And this one is holding them steady. So it's pretty much been a management issue. When I found my doctor, now 10 and a half years ago, I said, but the doctors at the place where I was diagnosed said there's no cure, and you have to understand, I have these children, I have a responsibility.
He was your third doctor, right?
He was my second doctor.
I thought.
Yes.
I mistaked. I thought I knew everything about you. But you went to doctors that basically had very bleak
well, yeah,
assessments.
they just didn't give me much hope,
right.
And it was very difficult. Nobody ever gave me a timeline, and I'm thankful for that.
Right.
Nobody ever said you have this much time.
Right.
Now the internet was nice enough to tell me that, but my doctors hadn't, even the ones that I wasn't thrilled with, the one that I wasn't thrilled with. But I found a doctor. A good friend of mine is a radiation oncologist. He's in South Dakota. And then I went to this doctor who said the same thing. And I said, the doctors at the last place said it was incurable. He said it doesn't have to be curable to be manageable. And my friend had just said that to me. So once I heard somebody mimic his words, I trusted him. And felt very strongly. I traveled further to go to him. So loved him dearly. Although, which is a completely separate topic, their hospital stopped taking my insurance. Oh. So I kind of got the boot from this doctor that had gotten me almost 10 years of very successful, manageable, high quality of life. But yeah, I was very specific.
Now?
I do. I came back home to the place where I started, but there was a gentleman who had come and had been doing lung cancer that was newer than when I had been diagnosed. Right. So there was somebody great to
So I know that this is entirely, maybe a non-scientific assessment, but it occurs to me that when you started this journey, the iPhone hadn't been invented yet, wasn't in our hands yet.
No.
And when you think about how technology has changed, did you as a patient going through this process, have you felt at various stages, have you had conversations with, have you become more aware that many of us that haven't gone on that journey as directly, have you felt the change in science from 10 years ago?
Oh my goodness,
when you
yes.
nonetheless got sort of on a good track, but I think what's interesting is that people can find what they can decode your genes and sort of say, hey, there's something here.
We did do that when I was first diagnosed, but that was really looking at one particular drug and one particular mutation. The drugs I've had over the last 7 years were things most of us hadn't even heard of. I mean, of course, they were undergoing a lot of research, but they weren't in trials, and nobody knew their names, and patients hadn't heard of them. So, yeah, it's come a long way just during this time.
Now, you're an advocate in this arena as well. What are you trying to achieve when you go around the country, when you meet people? What are you trying to instill in communities? We have a lot of folks, as I said, from very different corners of this thing. I'm very impressed with the folks from Kesem that are dealing with kids. You talked about your kids. Their parents are going through some of these issues. What are you advocating, and what do you think communities can do better for those that are going through your kind of experience?
Well, I'm definitely advocating for lung cancer specifically
Right.
because I feel it's been very underrepresented, very underfunded, very overlooked, and I was so mad at the beginning. So I was really ripe to have those discussions and talk about stigma and all those kinds of things that.
Did you
just didn't.
experience that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I had nurses when I would have hospital care that would say, "Oh, I didn't know you smoked." Well, I didn't. And yeah, so I definitely there are a lot of assumptions. So, and people want to find a source. Everybody feels like they have to know the answer to the problem and how you got it. So, and that really has been impossible for me to answer. So,
What are
I
these
don't worry
social
about it.
factors around a patient, someone who's experiencing cancer? I don't want to say suffering cancer, you're living through it. What do you think are the other things that society can do? I mean, one of the things that just strikes me, and again, it just makes me angry, is because I do feel that you had 4.5 years of misdiagnosis, right? So part of this question I've just been reading a lot is about AI, artificial intelligence. I mean, not our subject right now, but artificial intelligence, and the fact that more and more machines doing screening are producing better results than humans doing screening. Now, maybe that's impolitic to say, but I just wonder, maybe that will be a big step forward. But what are the social and psychological factors that you think matter in a community?
I think the awareness is so important, that people understand and can level the playing field for, I mean, really with any kind of illness. But I think within cancer that they can kind of level that playing field, and the dollars and the just it's just not fair to everybody. Like, that's how I felt when I was first diagnosed. You just felt like you were so overlooked. So I think it's just people understanding. That's with that awareness, I think we'd come a long way to
And
even
before I
it
got
out.
the audience, although I'm continually drawn back to the 99-cent burger in my head. I don't want to ask you to become, social commentator and all this, but if you want to, feel free. But I am interested in your experience with clinical trials, because clinical trials comes up in every cancer forum I've done, every health forum I've done, I've got a friend out there I've gotten to know. He was in our Las Vegas group who started Stupid Cancer, and he's got something called CancerCon coming up in Denver. And if you know about CancerCon, look it up. It's mainly focused at youth with cancer, and he created a group called Stupid Cancer. He's a completely irreverent, wonderful guy, and he brings people together and resources to help, particularly youth, but now they're working across other sectors. But I'm interested in clinical trials because I just asked myself, why is it so hard? Was it hard for you to get in clinical trials?
No.
So what, from your, a lot of people with cancer now, right? Is it hard for other people to get in clinical trials?
I don't know that it's as hard for them to get in as it is hard to get them interested.
I see.
It seems
You were
that
interesting.
way. I was interested.
I see.
So I was willing to ask those questions
I
and
see.
jump. I think people are scared. They're worried about what that means. They see the clinical trial that they did in some TV show,
Right.
and think that this is what happens. I mean, every show I watch where someone is doing some research or going through a trial, I'm like, that's not how it works at all. And so I don't think they really understand it. They're afraid they wouldn't get the active agent. Perhaps maybe they're afraid they would, because you don't know, you may not be sure what it's going to do. And maybe doctors aren't getting the word out.
I think it's a marketing issue myself, but
So,
I wish I had more time with Stanley up here, because I think it's a really interesting question when I go around. But particularly,
But it's critical.
my family's from Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, and it's just sort of a horrible zone for this, but maybe that's true here too. But let me open the floor to questions and comments for Stephanie. Yes, in the very back. Hi. There are two very back, but we'll go to her first and then him next. Hi.
My name's Emily. Thank you, first of all, so much for sharing your story and being here and being so confident and everything.
Sure.
So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on if there is a role in mental health, or if you were ever approached, by your physician or somebody that was there to give you support in this struggle and journey.
Right.
Listening to your thoughts with your kids. So I was just curious about that, what your
Mental
thoughts
health.
are.
Yes, the tumor board that had discussed my case and diagnosed me, that the selection of doctors, so radiation, surgery, drug therapy, oncology, they came together, and there was a psychologist as part of that group. So they all came through the room and said, nope, we can't do anything for you. But the psychologist, she didn't want to get into a whole lot, but she wanted to make herself available, get to know me, introduce herself. It was a bit later, honestly, until I really needed that, because you kind of have these ups and downs, and sometimes go better than the others. Like, once we were moving and working on the problem, I felt like I had some control back. So didn't really need it right away. But then as you kind of deal with your family and what's happening and what could happen and all those kinds of things, then I
So
did
when
seek
did
someone
waking
out.
up every day pissed off change to waking up every day feeling glad and thankful you had time to change things?
Well, there were at least 6 months, I always say, until I scraped myself off the floor. But really, probably a year, somewhere between a year or two, that I was stronger about all of it.
Interesting. Yeah, this gentleman right here at the...
Hi there.
Hi. Who are you?
I'm Ryan. Sorry,
Hi, Ryan.
Ryan Hart. In 2013, I was diagnosed with a second time with a bone cancer, and I was set to accept the life you're now living with living with cancer. And luckily, I got a deal out of that through the folks at MD Anderson down in Houston. But even in that short time, there was, I'll say, existential revelation, that I carry with me today. So I want to know, after these 13 years or so with this, what's the biggest lesson you've taken from all this?
Terrific question. Thank you.
Wow. Kind of personal lesson, I'd say appreciate the day that I'm in. And take advantage of those moments. That's the big thing, especially with my children. Seeing every game that I possibly can, and every award ceremony that I possibly can, and all those little pieces, not only for me, but for them.
Do you think they've been impacted in positive ways? I hate to say that
I
they're
don't
positive,
think yet.
but do they realize? Do they have a sense of?
My younger daughter doesn't really remember. It doesn't.
I see.
Doesn't react. It doesn't bother her. They're very aware of all the pieces at this point. They understand it. They are more interested in the fundraising that we do in our community now. They want to help more. They know that it's my expectation that they find their voice, whether it's about this or some other issue that's very important to them. And my older daughter has more, I don't know, she just has a little bit angrier personality. Like, she's not an angry kid. She's a very funny, very smart kid, but she's got that little edge to her. But I think a lot of it, and her emotion, she can go off the charts very quickly. And I think she's got enough memory and concern that stays with her a little bit.
Yes, hi.
Hi there, I'm Wendy Myers. I'm actually the counselor at the Cancer Caring Center, which is a non-for-profit in Pittsburgh. Actually, Dr. Marks helped start 30 years ago. And we have grown our services. There's only 4 of us that manage the entire non-for-profit. And as a counselor, I was a medical social worker for years in the hospital system here in Pittsburgh. And of course, years ago, people either lived with it or we lost them, right? But now they are living with them, and you're a wonderful example of that. And so we try to come up with services to support patients based upon, how cancer has changed. And I think you even have to go to the basics. There's still a stigma with cancer. People hear that word, whether it's stage 1 or stage 4, and you think, am I going to die?
Right.
So we kind of address that fear head on, and we teach people you can live with the fear and have hope, and they can exist simultaneously. So we started a metastatic cancer group out of the Cancer Caring Center in October, and it's been very well attended because my goal is to try to teach people to live with this as a chronic illness, that you can live with it just like you would live with heart disease or diabetes, and it does affect the family. So
can I ask you a question before you get into her question? In what you've done over the last decades, one of the things, again, as a layperson in this, but again, impressed with so many of you, they're in the business, and my friend at Stupid Cancer, I've learned that part of the trick is getting people to not be passive about this and to aggressively search options, aggressively look at things. I'm interested, how much of that is part of your counseling?
It's a huge part. I go back to my social work in the hospital roots, where I'm the advocate for the patient, right? And there aren't many of us that exist in the hospital setting anymore. We don't bring in money to the hospital. So many social work departments for Pittsburgh were eliminated, if not downsized. So I use that now working for a not-for-profit, and any patient that calls into the center, I tell them that. I say, leave no stone unturned. You take the information you gather, and just when you said you're at that, it's like a roller coaster, I say. Some days you're up and I can get this, and other days you're down. You got to ride that roller coaster, and when you're in those valleys, you wave your red flag for help.
Interesting. Did you have a quick question, or I love your story.
I just want to say you're just an inspiration, and you are my typical patient. That's who I see in counseling, and it gives me hope that you can live with this illness. So thank you.
Well, and it's so wonderful that you're looking at those kind of the changes in these stages, because it does feel sort of odd. Everybody talks about survivorship, and it feels like there was a time where survivorship meant you were cured. And I think people still kind of have that piece in them. And I am so thankful for how good I feel, but there are some things that come along with these drugs, and like fatigue. I am crazy fatigued most days. And so survivorship, I think, is more than it used to be. So knowing that you're talking about kind of the evolving or the evolution of survivorship, I think is great.
I want to leave this on a good note, but I can't. You guys are all so wonderful. And, I'm a journalist. I'm a typical journalist that I thrive in cynicism and darkness. And I'm not used to being around such good people. I do want to ask a question, because you mentioned healthcare. And we're going through a lot of healthcare somersaults and twists and turns in this country. And I'm just interested, maybe this will be the newsy part of it. How has the health world been for you? The health provision of health insurance and that. It sounded like you wanted to bitch a little bit about it, and go, no?
I've had a lot of good experience. Yeah. I've been very lucky, and a lot of things that I've heard maybe aren't covered for some people have been covered.
But as you see this out there in others that you're advocating with, I'm just interested in where the country is. One of the things I worry about is we've got a lot of good people with heart, and I've known a lot of politicians and people that I would see get things done, and they would be for good means, but they would be very Machiavellian about how they got there. I somehow admired that. But I'm interested in whether or not as we try and think about these challenges, whether we're seeing the resources eroding, we're seeing literacy kind of erode in some of the areas, but you don't seem to have that. I mean, you
Well,
seem to be wanting to give me
I
hope.
worry, and I left my job about 2 years ago.
I see.
And decided to go on disability, mostly with the fatigue and some of that kind of stuff. But so all these changes and the upheaval has been very scary, because it took quite a while before someone leaving their job can get on Medicare. So I've now crossed that and come out okay. I think drugs is a big question mark. I love precision medicine, but at the same time, I hate for it to be so precise that it takes somebody out of an option. Because I was negative on a particular marker called EGFR, and happened to go start on a drug for that before my results came back, because at the time they were looking mostly at demographics, and I was a young non-smoking woman, so they just gave me the drug, and it worked for 3 years. So if it had only been based on my results, I wouldn't have had those 3 years in there.
So I just want you all to know I tried to drag her to a dark place, and it didn't work. Stephanie Dunn Haney, thank you so much.
Absolutely.